Crinport was not yet a tourist trap. This ancient European city was still mostly unknown, a beautiful maze of impossibly old buildings and hidden courtyards. My new wife, Lena, and I were barely 2 weeks into our honeymoon, and naturally, we needed someone else to join us. Maybe it was the crushing pressure of non-stop romance, but we found ourselves fighting over who got the window seat on the train from East Crossing. So, when this incredibly cheerful stranger, Buck Rucker, showed up at the station, we were actually relieved. He was from some remote place called Iron Gorge in the Horizon Territory. He casually mentioned he was heading to see the most all-fired old Methuselah of a town in Europe, and said that traveling alone was enough to send an intelligent, active citizen into the melancholy ward of a daft house. It was a pretty obvious hint, and we snatched it. We both intended to suggest he join us with some slight hesitation, to signal that our marriage was perfect and we weren't desperate for company. But we ended up messing it up completely, starting to speak at the exact same moment, stopping, then awkwardly starting again together. Anyway, no matter how, it was done. Buck Rucker became part of our party. Lena and I immediately noticed the huge, pleasant benefit. Instead of sniping at each other, the restraint of a third party meant we started spending every available second making out in odd corners. Lena insists that ever since, she has advised all her newly married friends to bring a chaperone on their honeymoon. We spent the week exploring Crinport, soaking up Buck's wildly exaggerated stories and frontier slang. He truly seemed like he'd stepped straight out of a bizarre Western novel. We saved the biggest attractions for last, the Citadel, which overlooked the city, and the Grim Spire, the notorious torture tower. It was a sweltering July day. The sun was intense and moveless, baking the city with a heavy, oven-like heat. We were walking around the huge outer wall of the Citadel. The deep ditch, or moat, that guarded the northern side hadn't been used in centuries. Its base was now filled with tea gardens and little orchards. We stopped, leaning over the wall, looking down. The ground felt 60 feet below us, and the sun seemed to pour into that deep cut, making the air shimmer. Beyond the garden, the immense gray stone wall rose, disappearing into massive, brutal angles of ancient stonework. We were lazy. We had nowhere to be. We just lingered, leaning on the stone. Just below us, a scene of total peace was playing out. A big, sleek black cat was stretched out in the sun, while a tiny, playful black kitten tumbled and gambled around her. The mother would flick her tail for the kitten to chase or gently push it away to encourage more play. They were right at the base of the wall, enjoying the lazy afternoon. Buck Rucker, trying to be a part of the fun, bent down and picked up a small, moderate-sized pebble from the path. "Check this out," he said, holding the stone. "I'll drop it far away from the kitten. They'll both wonder what it was." "Oh, be careful," Lena said, her voice sharp with instant anxiety. "You might hit the little darling." "Not me, ma'am," Buck chuckled. "Why, I'm as soft as a Maine cherry blossom. Lord bless you, I wouldn't hurt that pretty little creature any more than I'd hurt a baby. You can bet your bottom dollar on that. See, I'll drop it way far out, near the bushes." He leaned way over and dropped the stone. Maybe the wall wasn't perfectly straight, or maybe it was just a terrible piece of luck, but the stone didn't fall near the bushes. It fell with a sickening, heavy thud that echoed up to us in the hot, still air, landing right on the kitten's head. It shattered the tiny creature's skull immediately. The black cat snapped her head up. Her eyes, a blazing green fire, were fixed on Buck Rucker for a horrifying second. Then, her attention went back to the kitten, which lay perfectly still, only its tiny limbs giving a last, faint quiver. A thin, red stream began to trickle from the wound. The mother cat let out a sound, a choked, muffled cry that was sickeningly human. She bent over the kitten, licking the blood and letting out soft, mournful moans. Suddenly, she seemed to understand. It was dead. She threw her eyes up at us again. I will never forget that sight. She was the absolute incarnation of hate. Her green eyes blazed with a lurid, awful fire. Her white, sharp teeth seemed to glint through the blood that now stained her mouth and whiskers. She gnashed her teeth and stretched her claws out long and stark on every single paw. Then, with an impossible surge of fury, she made a wild dash straight up the sheer wall, as if trying to reach us. When her momentum ended, she fell back. Her appearance only grew more terrifying, as she fell right onto the dead kitten and rose again, her black fur smeared with blood and brains. Lena went pale, starting to feel faint, and I quickly led her away to a nearby bench in the shade. I went back to Buck. He hadn't moved, staring down at the furiously grieving cat. "Well," he said, as I joined him, his voice flat, "I guess that is the most savage beast I ever saw. Except once. It was a wasteland tracker who had a huge grudge against a half-breed named Rays." He launched into the story without waiting for me to ask. "Rays stole her little kid, her papoose, just to show her he appreciated the way they had tortured his mother with fire. That woman got that kind of look, that pure hate, so set on her face it just seemed to grow there. She followed Rays for more than 3 years until her tribe finally caught him and handed him over to her." Buck shivered even in the heat. "They say no man, white or native, has ever taken so long to die under a tracker's torture. The only time I ever saw her smile was right before I shot her. I came on the camp in time to see Rays finally pass out, and he wasn't sorry to go. He was a hard case, but I saw he'd gotten paid back in full. Darn me, but I took a piece of his hide from one of the skinning posts and had it made into a pocketbook. It's right here now." He patted his coat pocket. While he was talking, the cat kept trying to climb the wall. She'd run back, then charge, sometimes reaching an incredible height before falling with a heavy, sickening thud. She didn't seem to care about the fall, immediately starting with renewed rage, and each tumble made her look more horrific. "Darn it," Buck said, looking genuinely concerned. "That poor thing is desperate." There. It was just an accident, though I know that won't bring your little one back. Say, I wouldn't have had that happen for $1,000. Just shows what a clumsy idiot can do when he tries to play. I'm too gosh darn butterfingered to even play with a cat." He apologized profusely to Lena, who, despite her own horror, assured him it was clearly an accident. We went back to the wall. Missing Buck's face, the cat had retreated across the moat. She sat on her haunches, ready to spring. The instant she saw him, she did, a blind, unreasoning leap that would have been comical if it hadn't felt so terrifyingly real. Lena grew seriously worried. "Oh, you must be very careful," she warned. "That animal would try to kill you if she were here. Her eyes look like pure murder." Buck let out a big, booming laugh. "Excuse me, ma'am, but I can't help laughing. Fancy a man who's fought grizzlies and trackers being careful of a cat murdering him." When the cat heard his laugh, her whole mood seemed to shift. She stopped jumping and ran quietly back to the dead kitten's spot, sitting beside it, and beginning to lick and fondle it as if it were still alive. "See?" I said, trying to be clever. "The effect of a strong man. Even that furious animal recognizes the voice of a master and bows to him. Like a squaw," was Buck Rucker's only comment as we walked away along the city wall. We kept looking over, and each time, we saw the cat following us. At first, she would run back to the kitten, then pick it up in her mouth and follow us until the distance became too great. After a while, she abandoned the body altogether, having evidently hidden it somewhere. We now saw her following all alone. Lena's alarm grew into genuine fear. She kept repeating her warning. But the American only laughed, until he finally saw how pale she was becoming. "I say, ma'am, you don't need to be scared of that cat," he assured her. "I go heeled, I do." He slapped the pistol pocket on his back. "Why, sooner than have you worried, I'll shoot the critter right here, and risk the police interfering with a citizen of the United States." As he spoke, he looked over the wall. But the cat, on seeing him, retreated with a growl into a bed of tall flowers and vanished. "Darn it," he went on. "That critter has more sense of what's good for her. I guess we've seen the last of her. She'll go back to that broken kitten and have a private funeral, all to herself." Lena didn't say anything more, worried he might actually shoot the cat in a mistaken attempt to comfort her. We walked on and crossed the small bridge that led to the heavy gate of the Grim Spire. As we crossed the bridge, we saw the cat again, down below us. When she saw us, her fury returned, and she made frantic efforts to get up the steep wall. Buck laughed down at her. "Goodbye, old girl. Sorry I hurt your feelings, but you'll get over it in time. So long!" We passed through the long, dim archway and into the courtyard of the Citadel. After touring the beautiful old Citadel, we seemed to have forgotten the unpleasantness of the morning. The centuries-old lime tree, the deep well, and the glorious view all helped to wipe the image of the slain kitten from our minds. We were the only visitors to the Grim Spire that morning, according to the old caretaker, Old Man Kale. We had the whole gruesome place to ourselves, which allowed for a terrifyingly detailed examination. Even today, the Grim Spire is a terrifying place, but back then, it felt impossibly heavy with history. Dust coated everything. The darkness and the memories of horror seemed to have become sentient. You could feel the evil. The lower chamber was full of impenetrable darkness. The hot sunlight that streamed in through the open door seemed to get swallowed by the thick walls. It only served to highlight the rough masonry and patches of dark, rusty stains which, if the stone could speak, would tell dreadful memories of fear and pain. We were relieved to climb the dusty wooden staircase. Old Man Kale left the outer door open to give us some light, because his one long, evil-smelling candle provided almost nothing. When we came up through the trapdoor into the chamber overhead, Lena grabbed my arm so tightly I could feel her heart pounding. I wasn't surprised. This room was even more gruesome than the one below. There was a little more light here, but just enough to show the sheer horror of the space. Leaning against the walls were a rack of massive, double-handed executioner's swords, with wide, keen blades. Next to them were several beheading blocks with deep notches where the steel had bitten through flesh and into the wood. All around the room were horrific implements: spike-filled chairs, racks, iron boots, gloves, collars, all designed to compress the human body excruciatingly slowly. There were steel baskets that could slowly crush a head into a pulp. Lena grew pale with the horror of it all. At one point, overwhelmed, she sank onto a chair, but shot up with a shriek, all thoughts of fainting gone, when she hit a torture spike. We all pretended it was just the dust and rusty spikes ruining her dress that had upset her. But the centerpiece of this chamber of horrors was the thing known as the Lady of Thorns. It was a roughly shaped, bell-like figure of a woman, coated in rust and thick dust. A heavy rope was fastened to a ring at its waist. Old Man Kale pulled the rope, showing us that a section of the front was hinged like a door. Inside, there was just enough room for a man. The door was incredibly heavy, built to automatically shut once the rope tension was released. The inside of the hollow iron statue was honeycombed with rust. But when we looked at the inner side of the door, the horrific truth was perfectly clear. Here were several long, square, massive spikes, sharp at the points. They were positioned so that when the door closed, the upper spikes would pierce the victim's eyes, and the lower ones would puncture his heart and vital organs. The sight was too much for Lena. This time, she fainted dead off. I had to carry her down the stairs and set her on a bench outside until she came to. When I got back up to the chamber, Buck Rucker was still standing opposite the Lady of Thorns, deep in thought. "Well, I guess I'd been learning something here while Madam was recovering," he announced. "Seems to me we're way behind the times back in the States. We used to think the Native Americans had the corner on making a man uncomfortable, but I guess your old medieval law and order crowd could teach them a few things." He looked at the device with strange admiration. "Those spikes are still sharp enough, even with the rust. It'd be a good thing to get some of these toys back home to show the boys and girls on the reservations how old civilization lays over them at their best." He rubbed his chin. "Guess I'll climb in that box for a minute just to see how it feels." "Oh no! No!" Lena called, having followed me up the stairs still shaky. "It is too terrifying." "Nothing's too terrible to the exploring mind, ma'am," Buck said firmly. "I've slept inside a dead horse during a prairie fire, and inside a dead buffalo when the Comanche were around. I haven't backed out of an odd experience yet, and I'm not about to start now. Seeing he was determined, I only said, "All right, but hurry up, old man, and make it quick." "Not so fast, General," he said, using his nickname for me. "The gentleman who stood in this canister before me didn't volunteer. I guess they had some ornamental tying up first. I want to do this thing fair and square, so I need to be properly fixed up first. This old-timer can find some rope and tie me up, right?" He slipped a gold coin into Old Man Kale's hand. "Take it, partner. Don't be scared. This ain't no public hanging you're assisting with." The custodian produced some thin, frayed rope and began to bind Buck Rucker quite strictly. When his upper body was tied, Buck said, "Hold on a minute, Judge. I'm too heavy for you to lift into this thing. Just let me walk in, and then you can tie up my legs." He backed himself into the opening. It was a close fit. Lena watched, fear in her eyes, but she couldn't speak. Old Man Kale finished the job by tying Buck's feet together, making him completely helpless inside his voluntary prison. "Guess this Eve was made out of a dwarf's rib," he joked, his face radiant with anticipation. "There ain't much room for a full-grown citizen to hustle. Now, Judge, you just start letting this door down, slow on me. I want to feel the same pleasure those other guys had when those spikes began to move toward their eyes." "Oh no!" Lena broke in, near hysterics. "I can't bear to see it." "Say, Colonel," Buck pleaded, "why don't you take Madam for a short walk? I wouldn't hurt her feelings for the world, but now that I've come 8,000 miles, wouldn't it be too hard to give up the very experience I've been panting for? A man can't get to feel like canned goods every day." My curiosity, always my weakness, won out over common sense. Lena stayed, holding tight to my arm and shivering, while the custodian began to slowly, inch by excruciating inch, slacken the rope holding back the iron door. Buck Rucker's face was positively radiant as his eyes followed the first, slow movement of the spikes. "Well," he breathed, "I haven't had enjoyment like this since I left New York. Easy there, Judge. Don't you rush this business. I want a real show for my money, I do." Old Man Kale, perhaps inheriting some blood from the tower's former occupants, worked the engine with deliberate, agonizing slowness. After 5 minutes, the outer edge of the door had moved barely an inch, and Lena was starting to sway again. I saw her lips whiten and felt her grip loosen on my arm. I looked away for a second to find a place to lay her, and when I looked back, her eye had become fixed on the side of the Lady of Thorns. Following her gaze, I saw the black cat. She was crouching there, hidden from sight, her green eyes shining like danger lamps in the terrible gloom. The blood that still smeared her coat only heightened their murderous color. "The cat! Look out for the cat!" I yelled, just as she launched herself out from her hiding spot. In that instant, she looked like a triumphant demon. Her eyes blazed with ferocity. Her hair bristled out until she looked twice her normal size, and her tail lashed around like a tiger's when its prey is finally cornered. Buck Rucker, seeing her, was simply amused. His eyes sparkled with fun as he said, "Darned if the tracker hasn't put on all her war paint. Just give her a shove off if she tries any tricks, because I'm so strapped down here I can't keep my eyes from her if she wants them. Easy, Judge. Don't you dare slack that rope." At that moment, Lena finally collapsed in a dead faint. I quickly clutched her around the waist to keep her from falling. While dealing with her, I saw the black cat crouching for a final, terrifying spring. I started to jump up to kick the creature out. But at that instant, with a hellish scream, she hurled herself, not at Buck, as we expected, but straight at the face of Old Man Kale. Her claws were tearing wildly, like a Chinese dragon rampant. As I watched in shock, one of her claws landed on the poor man's eye and actually tore through it and down his cheek, leaving a wide, sickening band of red where the blood spurted from every vein. With a yell of sheer terror that came quicker than his sense of pain, Old Man Kale leaped back, dropping the rope that held the iron door. I jumped for it, but I was too late. The cord ripped like lightning through the pulley block, and the heavy mass of the Lady of Thorns fell forward from its own massive weight. As the door slammed shut, I caught a final glimpse of our poor companion's face. He seemed frozen with pure terror. His eyes stared with a horrible anguish, dazed, and no sound came from his lips. And then the spikes did their work. The end was quick. When I wrenched the door open, the spikes had driven so deep they had locked in the bones of his skull and actually tore him, the bound, bloody remains, out of his iron tomb. He fell at full length with a sickly, heavy thud upon the floor, his face turning upward as he fell. I rushed to Lena, scooped her up, and carried her out, afraid for her very sanity if she woke up to this sight. I laid her on the bench outside and ran back into the tower. Old Man Kale was leaning against a pillar, moaning in agony, holding a blood-soaked handkerchief to his ruined eye. And sitting on the head of poor Buck Rucker was the cat, purring loudly as she licked the blood trickling through the gash where his eye socket had been. I think no one would call me cruel when I grabbed one of the old executioner's swords and cut her in two as she sat there.